Yeah, I don't know what's going on.
Does anyone have web? You guys have laptops?
What are you doing to our mind?
So go to this website, johngriffith.com/stream.
What?
John.
Are you watching?
Ew, I don't have that. That's fine. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Do you have any headphones?
Yes.
Headphones?
Oh, I might.
Just
Oh, no,
to
I-
plug them in to see if there's like sound.
I got it.
Okay. Watch yourself, watching yourself. Just created or never leaving.
Yeah, sound works.
It does? You can hear it? That's good. It's the first time I've ever done this. Ever. Like, I thought of it today and I just did it right now. So. It's always a good way to do stuff.
Who's watching?
Nobody, I'm sure. I didn't tell anyone. I just tweeted and posted it on Facebook. Maybe like 3 of my friends will click on it. My girlfriend. Yeah, that's cool. For free. But I thought that would be fun to do and to test it out to see if it works. It's a lot time delayed, I think. And then if it works, then you know the future is bright because then I can just future's bright. And you know, then you could theoretically just do this, and you wouldn't even have to come to class or whatever. I don't want to offer you that opportunity.
Yeah, let's get more.
It is, but the objective is also to get people to do anything.
Yeah, something better than nothing.
And to tear down the walls of, you know, the barriers is also a goal. So I'm glad that it's working, and I'll try to make the URL simple, johngriffith.com/stream, and then we'll move forward. So you're my test subjects. It's kind of cool. Fun. All right. So I wish there were 2 cameras because the camera just shows the square.
This is your laptop camera.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to, because I just thought of it today. I didn't have my video camera, which has feeds, even HDMI. So I have to figure out. I don't have enough time this weekend, but in the future, by next semester, how I can set the camera back there with full HD, stream it in, and then even with the mic, because the mics will also work. I can have it directly plugged in, and then my mic too, which sounds really good, can connect to the camera, and then that can feed into this, because right now it's only going to be picking up the laptop mics. But it's good to know, so now I just have to take the next step and go full HD, wireless mic. I even have that mic that I can pass around to. And it has 2 shotgun mics, so it picks up a lot of the class. If it's mixed well, it's pretty good. So, guinea pigs, you guys. All right, so I'm glad that worked. Thanks for being part of the test group, and I hope I don't freak anyone out when I stand too close to the. My head's really big. So we'll get started, and this week we're going to talk about methods. As you know, the midterm is quite literally, it represents midway through the term, midway through the semester, and we should be about halfway done with our papers by now. As I drew the rectangles up on the board last week, you have the cover page, introduction, another half page of introduction. Starts with a literature review, and then right now we would be on our 8th page. And so you've essentially written 7 pages of your final paper right now. And if you're smart, you'll go home this weekend and you'll rewrite it and you'll edit it, and you will literally have 8 pages of your final project done. And then you just write maybe 2 more pages, one next week, one the following week, slap your bibliography on there, call it good, and be done by the end of November. Submit it, try to get your grade back. If you like it, keep it. If you don't, resubmit, and everyone can get an A. So you should do this, and just don't coast until the last week of class and then try to do it. Like, you have 7 pages right now, and we'll write our 8th page tonight.
Wait, so you'll grade the finals like before the end of class?
Yeah, typically 1 week before the exam date, I get crazy busy, so try to get them in before 1 week. If you turn it in like 3 days before the exam date, I probably won't have time, because then that's when I'm just cranking through. But like, yeah, if you submitted it today, well, I have some other. Maybe I could do it Sunday night. Yeah, if you submitted it today. So I would encourage you to do that. And because really, you can get an A in this class. If you wait till the last minute, though, it might be rough. And also, if you don't come to class, it'll probably be rough too. Because as you saw with the midterm, coming to class and hearing the instructions is really important. And like last week, I conveyed the instructions for the final, and I think the students that were here to absorb that are off and running, and the students who weren't here are playing video games. I don't know what they're doing. So we're going to keep going down that path, to success tonight with the methods, because again, it's cover page. Oh, I forgot. Cover page, abstract, introduction, another half introduction, literature review, literature review, literature review, literature review. Tonight is page 8, and that's the methods section. Now there are leeway, obviously, but there is leeway, obviously, with the pages, but you can structure it that way. This would be the 8th page. Methods. Sociological methods. This is a sociology course, even though it is anthropology. I don't know how many other schools do that, but it's a little bit tricky for me as an instructor to waffle back and forth. But we always keep in mind the distinction of anthropology are 4 pillars: sociocultural, linguistic, archaeology, and biophysical. And if we just write our papers through one of those lenses instead of this overall broad lens of sociology that I teach in my intro to sociology class, we'll be okay. So it would be a good idea for you to know which of the pillars you're basing your research off of. Probably going to ask you to put that on your cover page. You've done a literature review. You did article reviews, which are going to transform into a literature review. And that told me what other people have said and found out about your topic. And then as you move forward, you're then going to produce your own research. You're going to support or negate prior literature. So as you found that secondary source in your midterm that supported or negated that source, you're going to do the same thing, but specifically through your topic and the very clearly defined way that you're going to approach a social problem or a social group, a social institution, a social process, through one of those 4 pillars. I think you all have your topics in your articles by now. There are only a few of you who are still using websites and newspaper articles on your midterm, and hopefully you're well past that at this point. So again, you found out what other people said about your topic. Now it's time to do something yourselves, or at least propose to do something. And you need to choose a method. And so I'm gonna ask that you choose your method tonight. We're going to do a little bit of a class exercise in which you can do that with a little bit more encouragement than just words, with actual pen to paper, and then you can actually write that tonight and choose your method. So I'm going to give you a couple methods here. Students from my class last night did a presentation on methods, which was great because it buttressed my presentation. Because mine, you know, they kind of go down tangents and get abstract and philosophical. The students last night really kind of rattled off those methods. But while I'm presenting these, try to grab onto one of these methods and fully understand what it is, and if you like it, and if it is appropriate for your topic, and just write it down and get ready to write your method out in your paper. Okay? I take this from a $350 book, which is an encyclopedia of social science methodology. It's a great book. I had to buy it for one of my classes in grad school. It was a semester-long class, 16 weeks of sociological methods. So each week we would come to class and our professor would teach us one method. So we learned 16. In this class, I get to teach you as many as I can possibly fit into 60 minutes. So I'm throwing them up here rapid fire. Just know, though, that if you're interested in methods, you can get this encyclopedia for $350 and take a full semester-long grad school course in 16 weeks with a great professor at Michigan State. Professor Connor, Dr. Connor, good guy, really good guy, like him. This is a lecture that I usually do, but I've stolen some slides from another guy here, Alan Berger, who is a professor at the City College of Chicago. I'm giving full credit. I'm just going to utilize some of his slides here because I came across them this week and I said, that's exactly what I do. And I put them up there just to show you that not everything that comes out of my mouth is my own perspective. Sometimes it's my perspective that is duplicated without me having even known it. I didn't take this from him just to use it. I found it is exactly what we're doing, and you can see that right there. We first we selected our topic. We based our topic on our 4 pillars. We've talked about that all semester. We have a topic that's guided by a sociological perspective. Out of your curiosity, I allow you to pick any social topic that fits into one of those 4 categories that is suited to your best interests and what you're curious in about society. And then we clearly define that problem. We did that with, I believe it was Essay 2, where we moved from, okay, I'm interested in basketball, you know, to, okay, what am I going to talk about? Well, racial differences in basketball, or unfair treatment to women in sports and Title IX, and we've talked about some of these things in class. So you got to, after you select your topic, clearly define the problem in considerable detail. I've had some students really thrilling me, showing their progress this week. Send me emails, and I'll work with some of them. One of the emails was race in sports. You know, I was talking about race in sports because that's my thing. But a student in this class and in my other class is doing race in sports, and they sent me an email that said, Girdwood, I'm doing race in sports. Can you help me out? And I said, well, absolutely, but I need to know a couple things. I need to know what races, what sport, what level of sport, professional, amateur, or youth, what country, America, Europe, and what sort of result are you looking for? Are you looking for differences in the owners of the sports, the coaches, the players, the fans, unfair treatment, misrepresentation by the media, bias in academia? What are you looking for? So I just shot out about 12 questions to him, and I think he answered them in his head. He or she answered those questions in that student's head and came up with a clearly defined problem that can then be conveyed in considerable detail. Because if you present me a paper that says, this paper is about race and sports, oh, you're going to fall hard. So you have to clearly define it in considerable detail. And we should have done that through Essay 2 and then progressing towards the midterm. Speaking of the midterm, that's point number 3. We review the literature to see what has already been done and found on this topic. And that's when I encourage you to find out what the gaps are in prior literature. Because if you're doing a study that's already been done before, you need to move past that. So if you're trying to tell me how poverty relates to crime in Saginaw, you know, I've read that every week in the newspaper and seen several studies on that. So take it a step further and talk about poverty and homosexual families, or poverty and kids that are committing shoplifting who live with their grandmas, or something extremely unique that is rarely studied. And you can add that and you can bring that to the table and fill the gaps left by prior literature. So again, number 3 is you found what other people discovered on your topic, and then you also found those gaps which you will then fill. Point number 4 is you're going to formulate your hypothesis. That's an educated guess of what you think is going on, and it's not a description of the problem at this point. With the hypothesis, you're going to try to explain why something is happening. So you're not going to say that there is a higher birth rate in this area, or there is a lower crime rate in this area, or there is a higher cancer rate in this area. You're going to try to hypothesize why that is true. If you think people are obese because they drink sugary pops, say that, use that cause or correlation statement in your hypothesis. If you think that cancer is caused by the dyes and chemicals in my diet pop, that I'm not getting obese, but I'm getting pancreatic cancer from drinking the diet pop, tell me that. Or if you think it's proximity to a nuclear power plant that increases cancer rates, tell me that. That would be your hypothesis, and then you would seek out data to try to support or negate that hypothesis. Well, you try to support your hypothesis, but you might find out that it was incorrect. Number 5, you choose a research method. That's this week. So we're at step 5. We've already gone through all 4 of those steps, and we've reached step 5, where you locate and prepare to clearly define your research method. As I said, I'm going to rapid fire them tonight. You're going to pick one, write it down on paper, and do it a little bit of detail. After that, you're going to collect your data and pay attention to the validity of that data. We're going to talk next week about sample limitations. The validity of your data is going to be based mostly on your choice of method and your sample. If you interview one person and you try to draw inferences about the United States from that one person interview, it's probably not very valid data, because your sample is not very representative of your population. If you use statistics to explain how people feel in a small classroom setting like this on a specific Wednesday night at 9:45, and you try to pull some statistics to explain that, perhaps you can do that very well, but maybe statistics and quantitative data is not really that appropriate for a sociocultural or a social psychological study. Maybe you want to use qualitative data or something like that. So you want to choose an appropriate method, and that, along with a very strong sample, will give you stronger data and a more valid research proposal or article. Of course, you're going to analyze your data. You don't just collect data. You don't just do interviews. You take the words that people say and you do some type of analysis. If you're doing statistical analysis, you don't just copy and paste graphs from the USA Today. You have to tell me why those numbers are like they are. And you don't just make stuff up. That's opinion. You have to do a critical analysis and, scientifically, using a scientific method. That's why we have methods. We're not at a point like we were maybe in middle school where we just copy and paste little charts and say, well, I think this is true because of this. Maybe that's a hypothesis, but you need to go and do a scientific method to support or negate that. And then you're going to publish or speak on your projects. I'm hoping that we wrap our projects by the end of November, and the weeks in December we can just sit around the table eating pepperoni pizza, talking about how great our papers are. That would be speaking at a professional meeting about our paper, or publishing our paper. Most academics publish in scholarly academic journals, which you have reviewed. In this class, we're going to publish to the Journal of VSpace. All right? But I do encourage you to post to blogs, too, because, if you put your paper online, there's a site called academia.edu. You can post your papers there, and they will show up in Google searches. Academia.edu is actually pretty cool. You upload a PDF, and it gives you statistics, so you can see people in like Switzerland, France, Brazil, whatever, reading your paper, and it's pretty cool. Because if you have a broad topic like I did my master's thesis on, I did it on food stamp participation. So if people are trying to do research, like high school kids or something, about food stamp participation, my paper will come up in Google search results, and I'm assuming they will probably reference it or something. It's got some good data. It's not a published article by any means, but comes up through Google. So if your requirement's not scholarly academic journal articles, you might find my paper. Or if you upload yours to academia.edu, a student might find your paper doing a high school research project. And at least to me, kind of nerdy professor, that's kind of cool that we have that ability with the democratized information system now with the internet. Forming your hypothesis, you have to remember that a hypothesis is a testable statement. It's not just educated guess. It has to have some variables. And the types of variables are independent and dependent variables. So your hypothesis is not just, I think crime is higher in Saginaw because of poverty. Poverty, that's not really a variable, yes or no poverty. Income level, might be a better description of the variable. Crime rate is a better description of the variable as opposed to does crime happen, yes or no. And a specific type of crime would also help. Like, I'm going to talk about the differences of domestic violence and murder by race of African American and Caucasian in urban and suburban areas. Then we're getting to, there's 3 variables right there that I just listed. So think of your study as having at least 2 variables, if not 3. And the most common socioeconomic status variables are going to be what? I just named a bunch of them, but can you just kind of throw them back at me? Go ahead. Income level, sure, that's a variable, yeah. It's also an outcome. So,
Specific race.
Yeah.
Between African American and Caucasian.
Sure, race. This is good because we can talk about independent and dependent after this. So what else? Some variables. There's one that's kind of like race that we can't change. Yeah, gender. Yeah, gender.
Age.
Age. That's a good one. Yeah, I haven't used that one this week.
Social environment?
Yeah, social environment, but you got to define that a little bit better. So what might you define the social environment as to be a variable?
Parents? Or
Yeah, family structure, definitely. So family structure, a divorced family and a married family, a second marriage family, a surrogate family, a foster family. These are all different types of family structures. So that's definitely, that'd be part of their environment. So if you get specific and talk about family structure, that would definitely be a variable. You see how I define them as variables? I don't just say family structure. I start listing the types. These are the categories. So another student sent me an email, and it included some survey questions. And I'm hoping to bring that up later, and I'll show you her survey questions and how they're very basic, great start. But I said you need to categorize it a little bit more. So you were talking about race earlier, and you said black and white, African American, Caucasian. You can label them whatever you want. But as I'll show you in this email exchange I had, can't just use black and white. We actually have to use the United States Census ethnicity categories if we're going to do a real valid study. And we'll go into that more with this email exchange. But variables are important to know right off the bat. And the difference between dependent and independent is most clearly shown by race and gender. I asked this student in my Monday class at Delta if he could explain to me what an independent variable was. And so I'll ask you the same, because he answered with a brilliant response. Probably a young freshman at Delta College. And I said, can you explain to me, if I say race and gender are independent variables, tell me what it means to be an independent variable. So can any of you do the same? Knock me off my feet? give me a idea of what it means to be an independent variable, socioeconomic wise? You could do it scientifically if you wanted, actually. So you take that and apply it to social science, or mathematically. Go ahead.
Well, I guess the basic of it is redundant. Redundant definition is it's a variable that's not dependent on any other variables. So, like, I guess an example would be, so it's something that no matter what the other variables are, it doesn't change.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, you can have a relationship between. I think a good way to explain it.
This is what you explained it very well, because this is why race and gender are great examples of independent variables. Because if I get rich, does my race change? You know?
Exactly.
If I shoot somebody, am I all of a sudden black? You know? That's crazy, right? Like, if I go put on a dress, am I a girl all of a sudden? You know? No. Now, gender is different than sex, and we won't have that long discussion that I usually do have in my intro to social class. But gender is, I think we talked about it actually. It's the sort of the representation of the sex. Go ahead.
Those model examples that you just said out loud, are those independent variables? Examples that you were just saying?
Independent would be race and gender.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe age would be a great independent variable too. But now let's talk about some dependent variables. Tell me some dependent variables and what that means.
Time.
What's that?
Time.
Time.
You can change time, like the time that you do the experiment. One that you can manipulate.
Sure, like frequency. So if you're going to test something and you're going to say, if I want to figure out if yelling at somebody is going to lessen their self-esteem, and I'm going to yell at a kid for 30 seconds, and I'm going to yell at another kid for 30 straight hours. And then I'm going to ask them both afterwards how confident they are in their life. So time could be a dependent variable. Right. It would be a subject, I'm sorry, a cause or influence of it. I'm sorry, a dependent variable is subject to the influence of another variable. Okay, go ahead.
What did the kid at Delta say? I'm curious.
He said he said something about human beingness or something like that. Because I was using race and ethnicity, and I was saying, like, so explain that to me, and he's like, it's part of our humanness, you know, and I was like, yeah, that's such a great thing to say, because it's something inside of our, like, bodies that, like, we can't change no matter what social influences just rain down on us, you know. We can't change really the color of our skin or our, you know, gender makeups.
So, not to argue, but I think in that example you just did, even with time,
Mm-hmm.
the time was still the independent variable.
Mm-hmm.
Because what's being influenced is their confidence in their life,
Mm-hmm.
their outlook on their life.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're manipulating is the amount of time that you're yelling at them.
Mm-hmm.
So the independent variables are typically the variables that the researcher or the experimentalist is manipulating directly.
Mm-hmm.
And then the dependent variables are the ones that are changing because of what you're changing.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And it's a terrible example. The better example would be this. I'm going to tell somebody a compliment and see how long they do their homework. I'm going to tell somebody that they're an idiot and see how long they do their homework. And in that case, the time would be better described as the dependent variable than the first example, which time was an independent variable. That's a good catch. So this allows me to take one of my world famous tangents and let you all know that on the midterm in my Social 111 class, I posted a comment to the student's paper that he had made a mistake on APA format, and he emailed me back and he was like, no, I didn't. That's right, and here's why. And I was like, oh yeah, you're right. So I was wrong. It was the use of ellipses in a bibliography. And I was under the impression that you should use et al., which is only used in parenthetical references appropriately, where in the bibliography you list a set of authors and you get to like 4 or 5 or something, and then you use ellipses, and then you, yeah. So I was like, thank you, you just taught me something. That was great, buddy. So that was right on point. So if anyone hears me say anything wrong, correct me. That was a good, important thing to do. Otherwise, we'd be all skewed. Yeah, time. I never think about time as a variable, so it's hard to answer. What?
Yeah, I don't know. It's pretty consistently an independent
Time?
variable. Science and stuff.
Yes. Yeah.
When you do
How long?
Physics, time is almost always your independent variable.
And like you're cooking something, right? Like you leave it on for 30 minutes or an hour. That's it's going to be an independent variable. It's hard to make it a dependent variable. But the homework complement.
That does when you're measuring the time as a result of it.
Got out of that one by the skin of my teeth. That was good. I appreciate that, bringing up that. That was a good exercise. I also told a student last night, she asked me something, I responded, and she couldn't process the information, so she came to like, she's just like, I can't. And I was like, that's why you're in school, because you need to, if you can always just continually flow the right stuff out, you're not actually learning. Like if I'm up here just continually spitting out stuff that I've said 50 times before, I'm not growing at all. But if ever somebody can stump me, like that helps me grow. And the same thing is true with you. If you're just going home, writing papers, going through the process and emotions, like you're not learning, then you should have dropped the class a long time ago. But you have the opportunity to write a better paper, come up with some really in-depth research, and cause yourself to work, and that's how you grow. Okay, so this is another one of Berger's slides, the logic of your theory. We've talked about this before, I hope. Causal logic and correlation. The new thing that I'm teaching now and learning is the sequence difference in these and the chronology. Causal logic is going to be a sequential logic, whereas correlation doesn't have to be sequential. It doesn't have to be chronological. So with causal, it's like A leads to B. So if you get, you know, if you drink a lot of chemical drinks, the number of chemical drinks you drink will lead to cancer. A leads to B. But that could also be a correlation study as well. But correlation is more like looking at incarceration rates of African Americans. So the incarceration rates of African Americans is off the charts right now. I think I've stated this before. Might be something like 75% of inmates are African American. I don't know. Look it up. Don't quote me on that. That's not a stumper. You can all Google it with your laptop. So the fact that that's not a causal relationship. Okay, their race did not cause them to be criminals or didn't cause the rates to be that high. There's a correlation. It's a relatable social fact that the incarceration rates are high, related to a variety of things, perhaps the way the laws are written, or the way the laws are enforced, or the frequency of traffic stops, to use a time variable. It's not necessarily causation, it'd be a correlation. And the sequence is not necessarily important in the correlation logic, but it is in the causation. A causes B. A leads to B. A plus B leads to C. A plus B plus C leads to D. This is a whole sequential thing. Correlation is the A with the squiggly line B. Let me just flip them. I did this previously though. So again, causal logic is a relationship between a conditional or variable and a sequence or a particular consequence with one event leading to another. Correlation exists when a change in one variable coincides with a change in another. So if you changed our laws and all of a sudden the incarceration rates equaled out, you might say, well, incarceration rates is kind of an important element, or the way the laws are written are an important element in the end result of who's in jail. You always have to try to find something out in this paper, not just describe it, but try to figure out the why.
I have a question about the correlation. Is the two different variables coinciding with change? Is the end result the same thing?
Oh.
For instance, drinking diet pop and cigarette smoking both lead to cancer.
Yeah, that that reminds me of. I've been drawing this on the board recently. Might be able to see it. Sometimes this is helpful for students. You see multiple variable research. So you see I have a square there, divide it up into 4 sections. And you can put your, so say you wanted to find what leads to cancer or what's correlated with cancer, and you think race, if you're African American, you think that leads to higher rates of cancer, and also drinking diet pop also leads to higher rates of cancer. So you would put your races up here. You would put white, black, drinks diet pop, and doesn't. And then if you set it up like this, you say, then you figure out who has cancer and ask them these questions. What's your race? Do you drink diet pop? And you may find that rates of whites who drink diet pop are high. Rates of cancer of blacks that drink diet pop are high. Whites that don't drink diet pop are low. Blacks that don't drink diet pop are also low. So in this case, you would probably come to some sort of conclusion that it's drinking the diet pop. To hold constant on race, the race apparently doesn't affect it. But if your rates are different, and this one was low, and this one was low, you might still say it's diet pop, but you might say that it's also white has a higher rate of cancer. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
The square thing tends to be helpful if I can get it out right. That from that far away, it even helps. That's amazing. And all the people viewing here, I wonder if they could see it. I love the square thing. I'm going to teach that more clearly, I think, in my future semesters. Again, though, reminding you that you have to try to find something out. You have to try to figure out the why. So you have to examine a social fact, like causes of cancer or health, and related to a phenomenon, which would be the cancer rates. And you have to seek general commonalities. So if you are studying topic of health, poor health and good health, you would look at similar phenomenon, maybe 2 different types of cancer or 2 different locations, and then you would draw general commonalities between those 2. In other words, you would not be looking at diabetes in Maine and cancer in California and trying to equate those 2 and say that your end result is about poor health, because diabetes and cancer, maybe they're related, maybe they're not, I don't know. But you don't want to do two distinctly disparate studies and try to relate them. You want to do a similar phenomenon and draw commonalities between them. And try to be pragmatic and practical in your research. Now, the first method that I'm going to show you on my short list here would be ethnography. We did an ethnography when we went to the Einstein Bagels. That's your basic anthropological qualitative method, and it's probably going to be the most popularly one chosen in the class, and I always teach it as strong as I can and do the class activity, because it's come to be known as the qualitative method of triangulation and social science research. It's descriptive, describes your basic tenets of your intro class: society, culture, group, social behavior. But then it also details and describes broader applications and inferences from the social processes. So it's not just a description. You have to be analytical with the data that you collect. But it's an easy one to use to triangulate, because you can triangulate it with surveys and interviews, which we'll come to see. But this is the general standard. This is essentially your guy that goes off into South America or Africa and sits in the huts and watches the people do their rituals and records them and talks about why they were doing them. So that's an ethnography. It's probably the most commonly one done by anthropologists. Survey research, this is a burger slide. Survey is a research method where subjects respond to a series of statements or questions, either as a questionnaire or an interview. So now you can see how a survey blends in together with an interview. And start to think of it like that. And this is where you could do an ethnography where you're watching people, and then afterwards you go up and you ask them questions, or afterwards you go up and you hand them questions to mail back to you. A survey can be like the United States Census, or it could be a Facebook survey. It could be a set of questions with a lot of absolute answers, like the census, or it could be a list of interview questions, where you either interview somebody in person, face-to-face, or you send them a set of questions, open-ended, that they could return to you by email. So these are, sample-based research projects where you survey as many people as you can, and those people that you survey is representative of your overall general population that you're trying to draw broader inferences from. So you can't survey every single person on Facebook. You can't survey every single person in America. Even the United States Census doesn't hit every single person. So this is just a sample of the overall population that you're trying to draw the broader inferences of. Surveys, again, questionnaires or interviews. Questionnaires can use closed or open-ended questions. Closed-ended question would be a yes-no question. Open-ended question would be something like, tell me about how you are experiencing bullying currently in your academic environment. Yeah, go ahead.
For instance, my papers about education and autism.
Uh-huh.
So on Facebook, I am a member of a few groups of parents who have autistic children, but they're not people that I personally know. Can I send them a survey, and do I need to collect personal data on them with their name or stuff like that, or can I just get generic, specific questions answered, but not have any specific information about them?
Yeah, I don't think that covers that in the slides, but surveys.
Or even interview questions, like how much, what is your yearly income between this and this? I'm sure they would answer that if it's generic and not real specific. And then how much do you pay out for therapy? Is it between this and this? I'm sure I could get them to answer those kind of questions, as long as I'm not attaching a name or geographic information or anything like that to it.
Identifying information, yeah. Yeah, you don't want to ask for their name because it serves no purpose. And that's why, really, you wouldn't ask for it because it serves no purpose. That's the reason why. Like, in no way in your data are you going to report on the names, unless you're studying baby names or something like that. So if you had a column on your sheet that listed names, like, you're never going to do any analytical data on that. So that speaks the same to all the rest of your questions. Like, each of your questions should only drive home a point in some data that you're trying to collect. So even if you ask them where they live, what state they live in, if you're not analyzing that data, then don't ask that question. Yeah. If you're just asking their impressions of autism and stuff, then only ask those questions. Otherwise, the state has no bearing on the study. But if you're doing a study on who likes autism more or who dislikes it more based on north or south of the Mason-Dixon line, then you'd have to ask their state.
Well, but how many responses would I need to be considered qualitative data?
Oh, that's up to you, and you write that into your study. And it's kind of too long of an answer to cover in this PowerPoint, but
if I sent out 50 surveys and I only got 4 responses, is that going to be enough to improve?
You put that in your paper, and you explain your limitations, and you explain how it might not be the best data. But you don't withhold it. It wouldn't get published, but for this class you just say, hey, here's my response rate, and this is why I think that happened. This is what I'm going to do next time to get a better response rate. With our I work in healthcare, and with our satisfaction surveys, we just had a meeting on it this week. They were looking at a 15% response rate as being good. So, it just depends on your study. The U.S. Census, they want a really good response rate. But if you're doing a survey like that, you might only get a 10% response rate, which is why you should pass out as many as you can, because knowing the response rate. But it also depends on your sampling too. And again, it's a little bit too much for this presentation, but if you do a convenience sample, in other words, if you do a survey of your friends on Facebook, like your 20 closest friends, your response rate is probably going to be like 99%. So depending on your sampling technique, that's going to influence your response rate. It's going to influence the validity of your data. So you'll want to include that too. Did you use a convenience sample? Did you use a snowball sample? If so, is a convenience sample as valid? Because that's another thing. If somebody gives the survey to 50 of their best friends, which is a convenience sample, and they get a 99% response rate, is that really better data than an inconvenience sample where you got a 15% response rate? So these are things that you talk about in your paper, which make it a strong paper, regardless of whether you had a good or a bad response rate.
And if I were to put together a survey or a questionnaire, can I send it to you for feedback prior to sending it out?
Yeah, I already got an email like that from my other class. And I was so happy that she sent me that email after class last night because, to be honest, her questions, and I was super glad that she started, but she needed feedback. So I'll show you that email later. It's like, it was great, and it's a great teaching tool that she gave me, so I was happy that she did that. Ethnography, surveys, questionnaires, interviews. Now we're on to our fifth method, case studies. Case studies basically examine episodes. If you were going to try to figure out what type of parenting techniques lead to some type of cause or something like that, and you wanted to do an ethnography and you wanted to follow 4 different families for a year, you might look at each one of those families as an episode, or each one of their sporting events as an episode. Anytime you're looking at stuff like episodically, that's probably going to be a case study. So a survey is not a case study, but if you go and you sit in a 3rd grade classroom for a week, then you go and you record your data. The next week you sit in a college classroom, you record your data. The next week you sit in an urban middle school classroom, and then the next week you sit in a rural high school classroom. These are going to be basic case studies where you're studying episodes and developing meaning from similar phenomena that you can draw broader influences from to help with your explanation.
Can you combine methods?
Absolutely, and that's actually at the end of this presentation is the whole sort of send-off is triangulation, the use of multiple methods.
And can this be in relation to observing social environments as far as for instance, the family?
Absolutely.
Language? Absolutely.
Yep, absolutely. That's going to be a stronger study, mixed methods. And there are different things that you can triangulate, which is in the second to last slide. What you want to do is use multiple methods, and to get it even stronger, multiple researchers, multiple, data, I think is listed on that, and multiple theories. But multiple theories is a tough one to do, especially in a 10-page paper.
What do you mean by multiple researchers?
Yeah, so if you're doing interviews, and this summer, this is a really easy example for me to talk about. This summer, I did research on basketball in Flint, and I went into a gym where there were about 250 African Americans and 0 Caucasians, except for me. And I asked them a bunch of questions, the players and stuff. And I feel like I had a really good rapport, but it would be a really great study if a black guy went in and asked the same questions to the same people. Same thing is true with male and female. And I use black, white, male, female because those are the easiest ones to talk about. If you go in and you want to talk to a criminal, a male criminal who's committed a some type of sex crime or something, and you sit down, you want to find out why he did it, and you just talk to him. Like a man-to-man conversation could be a lot different than a woman-to-man conversation, even with the same questions. So if you had, I use my squares again for this one, but if you had researchers, and this is not to say that this is the best thing of all time, but if you had a black male, a black female, a white male, and a white female, and of course, if you had the other races and other genders and GLBT and all that stuff, it'd be even better. But if you had all those different types of researchers and you asked the same questions, you'd have a stronger study. In fact, from the feminist methodology slide, even race and gender may influence a person's analysis of actually quantitative numerical data. Believe it or not.
Can there be cases too where, since you're just observing them, if you're, for instance, videotaping them, they wouldn't necessarily know who the researcher is? So would you still do that, or?
Yeah, that's a lot like the anonymous survey thing too. The sort of the same theme is like anytime you're observing someone, you have to let them know that you're really there. I mean, you can't trick them, but you know, I mean, sometimes there are undercover sort of studies, if you pass IRB. But yeah, you want to be as discreet as possible. So like when I was going around with my camera and stuff, I didn't run into the middle of the court. You know, just kind of sat back and waited for my opportunity. I wasn't pushy, and I just waited for them to be available. So it was important to be discreet. So yeah, multiple methods case study. This is the 5th one we've done. So moving on. Grounded theory sounds like it's a theory, but it's actually a method. And what it is, it's your chronological backwards method. That's how I teach it. What this is you review a case first, and you see what happens, and you develop a theory out of that. So instead of coming in with conflict theory or rational choice theory or, you know, symbolic interactionist theory, you would go and you would record data on a case first, and then you develop a theory subsequent to that. And this would be your own theory, and you would call it a grounded theory. So this is sort of the backward methodology where you don't start theory, hypothesis, method. You start method, develop your theory after that. So this is kind of a cool one, kind of a fun one, and I think it's kind of catching on new waves. So instead of teaching everyone 5 theories and 5 methods, this is one that says, you know, go out and just do your own method and come up with your own theory, and you know, you might grow a little bit better that way. I think it. No, I don't want to say it's easier to use somebody else's theory. I think it's pretty tough to come up with a grounded theory. It's an empirical approach. What empirical means is to experiment and observe. So you develop your research question first, and then decide what type of data would help best answer that question. Again, empirical means experiment and observation. It's this all-encompassing approach, empirical approach. So what is this, our 7th method, discourse analysis. I think this is also a very fun one. If you want to study media, movies, newspaper, the presidential debates, you would do a discourse analysis, a content analysis. It would be really fun. If you want to, you could probably come up with something that in which way you analyze the words that were spoken by the presidential candidates at the debates and say that Romney was more liberal and Obama was more conservative based on the way you analyze their words. So what discourse analysis is you take the words that are actually spoken, you record them, you write them down, or you take the words literally in a newspaper or a textbook, and then you analyze them. So certain people will have this thought that you know, textbooks might have a racial bias to them, or a gendered bias, or, you know, maybe we don't include African Americans enough in our history textbooks. Well, we can say that, and we can talk about that at the bar or whatever, but until you actually get the text and you record how many times and how many words are devoted to an African American perspective, you can't actually support that hypothesis or argument until you come up with some data for that. So I think I mentioned this one before. One of my more interesting studies that I've come across on race in sports is some researchers that did a discourse analysis on the 2000 March Madness basketball tournament, the one where Mateen Cleaves and those guys won it. And what they did was they analyzed every word that was spoken by the commentators throughout the tournament, looking for racial categorizations. The researchers were Eastman and Billings. And things that they were looking for was if you have a player, like a point guard, like a white point guard, who continually, the commentators say, is tenacious, gritty, hardworking, team leader, heady player. These are all cognitive words of description. If you have a player who's big, strong, fast, quick, and jumps high, these are all athletic descriptors. And this could be for a 6'9" African-American power forward. So if you record all these words, you say, well, the commentators continually describe the white player as smarter, and the black player is more athletic. This may have some underlying racial bias, and it's a really interesting thing to look at because probably these commentators are not going to Klan rallies. They're probably not like the most racist guys in the world, and they're probably not trying to be racist, but what you do is you look at what they're saying, the content of their words, you record them and analyze them, and you can find these very fascinating results, if you do a fun study like that.
How do you do this in a proposal?
The only difference between a proposal and an article is saying something that you will do as opposed to something that you did.
So for this, we probably wouldn't be able to put like wording at all, as far as since there isn't any actual words
Correct.
recorded.
If you wanted to, so we could do the autism one or the disability one where you might be looking at disabilities in film. And you might say, I'm going to watch 200 hours of film. Movies popular in the top 10 movies of the year from 1975 through 1985. I'm going to watch 200 hours of film, and I'm going to record instances of disparaging or supportive comments to disabled people in the films. Okay? And that would be your content. And then you would talk about how you're going to analyze it. By disparaging, I mean rude remarks or looking down or speaking about the disability as preventing them from doing something that an able-bodied person would do, etc.
Since it's so detailed, would you suggest probably not using this method for proposal?
No, I really like this one. I think it's really fun. One study I wanted to do, I might have done, I don't remember, was analyze the comments of online news sources. The guys that post comments and they're in their mom's basement and they're like, I hate this guy, he's such a jerk, like on the news, like in the comments section. So you could do a content analysis of the comments depending on what your study was. Mine was, as always, about athletes. So I was analyzing newspaper articles where athletes had been accused of a crime and seeing what the people said about them to see if they were racist statements. And I just think that that's really fun. And there are programs that analyze that data. So like you're not, sometimes you do code them all visually, but there are programs you just throw in like thousands of pages and then it just cranks all this stuff out.
So there are some things that you can do in the proposal and just say the things that you can't do?
Right, yeah. You just say what you want to do and what you think would be great. And you're not going to say, I'm going to watch 1 trillion hours of movies. That doesn't make any sense. But you have to do a feasible proposal, like, I would watch 500 hours of movies.
Oh, and then you're not actually doing it.
Correct.
But you can kind of hypothesize what
Yep.
you think the outcome's going to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the reason why that's important is because I don't want 45 papers that say, I'm going to interview one person because that's all I have time for. That's no good. So I want you to actually say, like, if I could do it, how I would do it is I would do it just like this. Because that can be useful for you because you can actually propose that to somebody and get grant funding. I know it's funny to think about when we're underclassmen or when we're not, you know, social scientists. But if you write a really good proposal, you could submit it to somebody for grant funding and you could do your project. You know, write a real one, get some funding, take a year off and do a great study. That's a realistic possibility that I don't think anyone thinks is, but I just have to remind you that it is.
I think if I was going into it.
Yeah, but with the flexibility of this class is you can write anything that aligns with your major or your interest, and so your study does not have to be about crime in Flint. It can be about somebody's writing about prosthetic arms in this class. So if you want to get funding to do a study on prosthetic arms, if you're an engineer that does prosthetic arms or whatever, you can do that. This is fun for anyone that's interested in media and communications. You look at textual structures, and there's other things besides words. You can actually look at facial expressions and arm movements and hand movements. These are things that you record in code. Rational choice theory is this idea that individual actors pursue their goals efficiently and seek the greatest net benefit. So if you think that that's how the world works, you would look through that lens, and you would test if that was true or not. Feminist methodology, as I've kind of alluded to earlier, is just the idea that you can't escape the skin that you're in. So and you can't escape the prior methods that I've taught if you use them. If all those prior methods were invented by old rich white guys and you use them as a, you know, not old rich white guy, you're still looking through their lens. So if an old rich white guy says ethnography is the way to go, you know, you can't escape that if you use his method. So a feminist methodology will say, you know, don't use those methods, or don't forget that you can't escape the hegemonic structure of dominance. But if you're aware of that, this is more a philosophical conversation. If that sparks your interest, we could talk more about feminist methodology. I encourage you, with all these methods, to research them more in depth on your own, because this is just a really quick sort of spilling them all out there, just shaking them all up in a can like Skittles and throwing them onto the carpet. You run after them like candy from a piñata. So as was asked earlier, can we use multiple methods? Of course. This triangulation. And you're going to want to remember to use these vocabulary words in your paper. Triangulation, mixed methods, enhancing the confidence of my study, the validity, my findings, my investigation. Triangulation is essentially the use of more than one approach to the investigation, or more than one approach, because there are different types of triangulation, not just triangulation of methods. And triangulation, despite its name, tri, does not have to be 3. It can be 2 or 5. It just has to be more than one. So these are the things, too, that you can triangulate. The data, so if you had quantitative and qualitative data, that would be triangulated. The triangulation of investigators, if you had the variety of genders and ethnicities, that would be an investigator triangulation. Theoretical triangulation, more than one theory. But especially for this, and probably the most common triangulation would just be the use of mixed methods or multiple methods. If you did an interview and an ethnography, if you did a case study and a survey, this would be a mixed method. It's going to make for a stronger and more valid research, study, or proposal. So to keep that ringing in your ears, I'm going to show you this video.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on.
Does anyone have you guys have laptops?
What are you doing to our minds here?
So go to this website, johngriffith.com/stream.
What?
John.
Ew, I don't have that. That's fine. Okay.
So, guinea pigs, you guys. All right, so I'm glad that worked. Thanks for being part of the test group, and hope I don't freak anyone out when I stand too close to the. My head's really big. Like. So we'll get started, and this week we're going to talk about methods. As you know, the midterm is quite literally, it represents midway through the term, midway through the semester, and we should be about halfway done with our papers by now. As I drew the rectangles up on the board last week, you have the cover page, introduction, another half page of introduction. Starts with a literature review, and then right now we would be on our 8th page. And so you've essentially written 7 pages of your final paper right now. And if you're smart, you'll go home this weekend and you'll rewrite it and you'll edit it, and you will literally have 8 pages of your final project done. And then you just write maybe 2 more pages, one next week, one the following week, slap your bibliography on there, call it good, and be done by the end of November. But I thought that would be fun to do, and to test it out to see if it works. It's a lot time delayed, I think. And then if it works, then you know the future is bright, because then I can just future's bright, and you know, then you could theoretically just do this, and you wouldn't even have to come to class or whatever. I don't want to offer you that opportunity.
Yeah, let's get more people.
It is, but the objective is also to get people to do anything.
Yeah, something better than nothing.
And to tear down the walls of, you know, the barriers is also a goal. So I'm glad that it's working, and I'll try to make the URL simple, johngriffith.com/stream, and then we'll move forward. So you're my test subjects. It's kind of cool. One. All right. Do you have any headphones? Yes, headphones.
Oh, I might.
Just
Oh, no,
plug them in to see if there's like sound.
I got it.
Okay. Watch your class while you're in class. Watch yourself watching yourself. Just creative. Or never leaving.
Yeah, sound works.
It does? You can hear it? That's good. It's the first time I've ever done this. Ever. Like, I thought of it today, and I just did it right now. So. It's always a good way to do stuff.
Who's watching?
Nobody, I'm sure. I didn't tell anyone. I just tweeted it and posted it to Facebook. Maybe like 3 of my friends will click on it. My girlfriend. Yeah, that's cool. So. I wish there were 2 cameras, because the camera just shows the square.
This is your laptop.
Yeah. I'm going to have to, because I just thought of it today, I didn't have my video camera, which has feeds, even HDMI. So I have to figure out, I don't have enough time this weekend, but in the future, by next semester, how I can set the camera up back there with full HD, stream it in, and then even with the mic, because the mics will also work. I can have it directly plugged in, and then my mic too, which sounds really good, can connect to the camera, and then that can feed into this, because right now it's only going to be picking up the laptop mics. But it's good to know, so now I just have to take the next step and go full HD, wireless mic. I even have that mic that I can pass around too. And it has 2 shotgun mics, so it picks up a lot of the class. If it's mixed well, it's pretty good.